Andy Street, Mayor of the West Midlands.
So first kind of questions, let's get into it. How has the pandemic impacted the whole of the West Midlands, do you think?
So you stand back and you say 12 months into the pandemic now, what's the effect been? And obviously the word is devastating. So you look at the death rate across the West Midlands and you just know so many people who've lost loved ones. Devastating is the word. But the thing we've also got to be honest about and say the effect hasn't been equal. Some communities have borne more of a brunt than others. And I'm very, very conscious of that when we think about how to come back. But then there's a positive side, isn't there? We've seen some incredible stories of human kindness, of resilience, of community organisations, of faith organisations playing their part. And you sort of learn that in life, don't you? At the worst of times, you tend to see some of the best of human nature as well.
Talking about possibly the impact of the economy during this, it was actually something you mentioned in your manifesto way back in 2017, and your plans did seem to be on track pre-pandemic. You know, these are your words. We had the fastest growth of any region outside of London, record employment numbers, great investment, but it looks like we might be the worst affected by the pandemic. So what do you think the economic cost will be on the West Midlands?
All of that is true. Just if we boil it down to one number only, which I know is a gross simplification, but it just tells the story. In the 3 years to the end of 2019, 97,000 more jobs had been created across the West Midlands. And we were actually seeing the sort of output gap with London closed as well. So we were actually doing levelling up. But we still have challenges, of course, but we were basically making good progress. It looks as though the increase already in claimants is 95,000. So a very simple way of thinking about this is all the progress in jobs that have been made in those 3 years has been lost in one. And there's lots of other economic impacts, of course, but that one number shows the scale there. Now, of course, the full impact, we don't yet know. There's a real balance here between how many businesses that are really struggling and, of course, have furloughed lots of people. How many of them will survive? And it's why I was such a strong supporter of what the Chancellor did to extend support to get the maximum there. But there will be further job losses there, definitely. Against, as we begin to reopen, how can some areas of the economy rebound?
If you could put a figure on the number that we're talking economically, kind of money-wise, is there any kind of figure that you could say in that now?
Yes, I can. It looks like the reduction in our economy was about 11% last year. We went into it with a 105 billion economy. So 11% of 105 is about 11.5 billion pounds.
And what do you think the hardest hit industry has been in the West Midlands?
We can actually see that. We do know which sectors have lost the jobs. So no surprise, in terms of job numbers, the hardest hit sector is hospitality. No question, that's the highest number of people. But there are other ways of looking at your question. Of course, if you take a sector like aerospace, that's really important, particularly in the Black Country, some of our brilliant manufacturers there. They are not going to bounce back as soon as things open up, let's say on the 21st of June. And the effect to them is really, really deep seated. So you might choose a sector like that. And then another area that's been entirely closed is, of course, the whole live events sector as well. And we see organisations like the NEC that so symbolise that for us. That's been incredibly bad. So there have been a number of really, really difficult areas.
Furlough was something that you mentioned earlier. In the West Midlands Combined Authority area, more than 260,000 employees were furloughed on the 31st of January 2021. What will you do to ensure unemployment doesn't spike after the pandemic and people do get back into work?
OK, so first thing to say is, of course, the support to current businesses will mean people move off furlough back into work. That's really important. And by the way, there's an important subtlety to this here. You don't just have to support people to the 21st of June. The reopening phase is quite tricky for businesses. If you think you're buying stock, you're possibly amending your premises. So all of that. And there's a crucial point there about the length of time they have to pay back loans as well. So that's one part. But the second part, probably the more important part, Exhibit A, Megan, what I call the mayoral jobs plan. And this talks about how we are going to find that 100,000 jobs that we have lost. And it's not never land this. This is about saying, where are the particular opportunities that we can see over the next 2 years? We don't need a fantasy decision from central government. This is what we can see. So big projects like how many people will be employed in HS2, probably about 5,000 more across the West Midlands. How many jobs will be the Commonwealth Games? How many will come in the digital sector that's still growing? How many will come in all of our transport investments that we're making? All these specifics. And then, of course, there's the retraining of people as well. And the whole question of people doing new programmes with colleges that will move them into new growing sectors, the work we're leading through the Combined Authority. So please, it's all there on public record. Go have a look, see the detail. I promise not to read out every page of it.
Thank you for that. So yeah, we're coming up to a year now that we've spent at home, and the public wants, housing, high streets, jobs, like you mentioned, their skills to top the levelling up agenda. So how exactly are you going to do this?
OK, well, there's all sorts of different parts of that. Let's just start with housing, because I do actually think this is actually a surprisingly strong part of what's happened in the last year. So again, pre-pandemic, we were doing really well on building new homes. We doubled the number of new homes in 5 years, building 17,000 a year. And the signs look really encouraging for that to continue, actually. So just yesterday, we went to a site up in Walsall where we're digging away, an old brownfield site to be redeveloped. There's an announcement, another one in Sandwell. But almost every day that goes by, there's announcements of new housing schemes. And I don't know if you know this, but data's collected about the resilience of the housing market in every city in the country. And Birmingham has actually been the most resilient. So it does look in terms as though housing for particularly young people to move into, it looks as though we're going to continue with our progress of building. And that's obviously good for the jobs in the construction industry. So that one I'm fairly clear about and optimistic, actually. If you think about, we talked a bit about jobs overall, so I won't go over all that again. But then if you come to training as well, that other piece that you talked about, what we are trying to do is use our adult education budget, 130 million of it we have, to concentrate on the growth areas, as well as obviously the government retraining schemes. So what do I mean by that? Digital is still booming, so we're trying to put more people through digital retraining. We've got 6.5 million for that. And what's really exciting is everyone who goes through it tends to go into a job at the end of it. Retraining in the construction industry, we've already talked about. Retraining in the health and social care, that's a big growth area that we're working on. And one that I just love as a really practical story. We talk about electric vehicles of the future. We just launched in Wolverhampton last week, 720 strong training program with the college there for mechanics to deal with electric vehicles to be trained. So I hope what comes out of that is we're thinking about specific areas which are still growing, giving opportunities to people to retrain in them.
We were talking then about staying home, but now we must talk about, getting people into these cities, towns, back into the West Midlands, away from their homes, if it's safe to do so. So You've got your Green Cycle plan, you've got your Cycle Hire scheme, but during the pandemic and after, what else are you going to do to ensure people don't just travel in their cars, because that might be where they feel the safest?
Yeah, so keep investing in public transport, really important. Remember, this all sort of flew by just before the pandemic struck. Bus fares held level again for the fourth year in a row. How affordable public transport is really matters. How clean and reliable it is will matter particularly. And I think a new rolling stock coming, cross city line upgrade to complete new rolling stock. We know that when you do that, people want to use it. And then, of course, there's this really interesting question about people no longer necessarily buy a season ticket. I think we haven't talked about this at all publicly, but I think this is significant, actually. And now if you look on the Metro, for example, you can now buy a ticket that you use 2 or 3 days a week, a Carnet ticket. So we're trying to think about how we make public transport reflect new ways of people's life and working, actually. But it's medium term. You are absolutely right, Megan. The city region as a whole has got to fall back in love with public transport. And every time I hear a politician in London saying a risk around public transport, I loathe it. I would like nothing more than taking the Prime Minister on the number 6 bus, electric bus, and show him it's green and clean and safe and everything. Would you please change your narrative around it?
We're speaking of travelling. I know we might go over these points again, but a lot of businesses have lay empty during the pandemic. Yes. I was on Birmingham High Street the other week, and there was loads of shops boarded up, loads of to let units. 9% of trading businesses in the West Midlands reported their turnover had decreased by at least 20%. So what can you do to ensure there isn't a mass exodus of businesses post-pandemic? Maybe they move out of places like Birmingham, choose to move into smaller buildings with less rent? What would you do?
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's two parts to this. If you're talking just about high streets, first of all, there is actually, it's not what I'm going to do. I think something's going to happen naturally here that's worth calling out. There is a trend towards the local, and that's probably a good thing, actually. If you go to some of our immediate high streets, you actually see some new vitality in them. We were just joking before about Sturchley, actually. Interesting. So I do think there could actually be a good trend here, actually, out of this, that those local high streets that perhaps have been a bit neglected in the days of the mass chains in the town centres and city centres. So that's good. What we've got to do in the city centres, though, in the big town centres, is we've got to get people back into offices, cultural venues, and of course, exhibition spaces in Birmingham City Centre. Absolutely critical, because that drives the customers for the restaurants, the bars, the cafes. So that's all about safety. I think there will be a regional marketing campaign behind this. We haven't yet signed it off, but I'm fully expecting that we will have to do it, want to do it actually, because that whole sort of message, it's safe, come and experience the great things the city and the town centre has to offer, will be part of it. But you know what, Megan? I think that people want to get back. I'm not a believer that people have loved sitting on their Zoom calls at all. And I think we could be quite surprised how swiftly, when people feel confident from a health point of view, how swiftly people get back, because people are naturally sociable animals. And even if the city centre does slightly different things, may not have as many retailers, it will be the natural meeting point, and new things will come, which we do socially together as well. And I'll give you a bet, by the way, that the John Lewis building in the centre of Birmingham, that doesn't become a new department store, another department store. That will become something really innovative. It's not my decision, it's Hammerson's decision as the owner of the Bullring and Grand Central, but it will be something really dramatically different, and you will see town and city centres putting new offerings together.
Well, you mentioned John Lewis. Let's look at that a bit further. What do you think for that space? Because I know you were really pushing for that, but it hasn't turned out like you wanted.
I was the person who signed the deal back in 2011, and I would sign it again, is perhaps the telling point here, because I absolutely believe, if the question is about John Lewis, I absolutely believe that they need to have a physical presence in the big regional cities, and then everything they do online supports that. But you need somewhere to actually sense the brand. So I thought it was hugely regrettable. I'll be blunt, I think it was the wrong decision from their own point of view. And of course, I regret that my favourite shop is no longer here in Brum, but you've got a great shop in Solihull. But to the point about what will happen with it, I don't know, but what I do know is that I've had a number of people talk to me about what they might do there. None of them are retailers. It's not my decision, as I say, it's Hammerson's decision. But I am very confident that as that incredibly well-connected place, a new use will come where people think, we really want to be in Birmingham City Centre, best connected place in the whole country, possibly. And to whet your appetite a bit, if you go to big shopping centre malls in the Middle East or China, you see very different leisure uses in them. And we are going to want to spend more of our money on leisure. It's just the sort of continuum over 100 years. And that will continue. And I think there will be new uses there. So watch this space.
It's not your decision, Andy, like you say, but what do you want to see there?
Something that would be unique to Birmingham. So what do I mean by that? That people would get on a train from all over the Midlands and come here because they can't do it anywhere else. Where newspaper journalists would write, gosh, that's exciting that Birmingham's got the first one of those in the UK. Let's see. But that's what we've got to aspire to. We don't just want to, because that's what's going to be, my point is, that's what's going to be needed to make our city centres really, really attractive coming out of the pandemic. And I do know that the big leisure providers are thinking about what it should be.
Brilliant. Well, let's move on to some of the listeners' questions. It might be that we kind of repeat some of the stuff. So, right, we'll start with Julia from Birmingham Southside Bid. You'll know Julia.
Oh,
many businesses, she says, many businesses don't have outdoor space with road closures and parking suspensions, which could cost thousands. How will you help local centres and bids to assist hospitality to trade outside after April 12th?
Yeah. So I can't give the planning consent. We know that. Julia knows that. I know that's not what she's after. I think what I can do is really think about the regional marketing offer to actually get people confident with confident with their return to these hospitality venues, actually. So I'd be hoping that we can do that. And what I hope Julia would also say I've done is been vociferous in my lobbying of government that these business support grants are extended. Back to the previous point that in the recovery phase, there's still risk there.
So we'll move on to Natalie from Sutton. She says over the last decade, there's been a significant decrease in the number of youth centres and clubs opening. Are we going to start investing in these kind of places to help young people as we come out of the lockdown?
Yes, this is right. There's been a huge cut in these, and although a lot of them were run by local authorities, I don't blame them. Their budgets have been under huge pressure. And I would like to see that reversed substantially, because I do believe, and actually I spent some time in my late teens, early 20s, actually involved in this sector loosely. So I do know that it can be incredibly beneficial for young people who are potentially at risk of getting involved, let's say, in things that are not so wholesome. So I'm a big believer in it. It does need further specific funding. It also, of course, in some cases needs agreement from local authorities to pass facilities over to community groups. I hope there will be an enthusiasm to do that. That doesn't always happen. There can be a reluctance. And the other thing that we've tried to do, by the way, it's not quite youth services, but I think it'll be appreciated by the questioner in terms of making easy access to all advice, support for getting jobs for young people. We've launched what we call our youth hubs. We launched one yesterday at Sandwell College. We've got it in Wolverhampton. It'll be coming to every area of the West Midlands, also supported by an online thing called the Youth Platform. And the idea is every single bit of advice, access point, knowledge of training schemes are all in one place, supported by the DWP in every area. So I think it's a really practical response for young people. And of course, the obvious point is that information should be available in any youth facilities we're talking about.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm from Birmingham. My question is just, what are the job opportunities going to be in the future, and how am I going to deal with all this?
It's a very fair question, and the answer is exactly what it is. This, what we've done is the specific response to this. It's actually, we're calling it the Youth Hub or the Youth Platform. So if you can either go in through the DWP job centres, or you can go in through the WMCA. The platforms are already there. The hubs we're just going to set up as we come out of the pandemic, obviously, but they are live in both Sandwell and Wolverhampton. I know you're Birmingham. And it's very simple. Everything from retraining, job vacancies, mentoring schemes, how to get an apprentice, what your benefit, everything is there. And of course, what's also been done through DWP is the youth coaches, as they're called, for specific focus on young people in DWP.
My name's Andy. I live in Shirley, so Solihull resident. Just been talking about what we think maybe the next steps are once we come out of lockdown. And for me, I think prioritising the frontline workers is probably an important factor. So anyone who's worked, you work in a petrol station, you work in a supermarket, the police, our teachers, I think we need to prioritise those guys next so we can get back to normal as quick as possible. And then hopefully the other thing I wouldn't like to see is too much of a financial burden placed on those who kind of supported and held the economy as best they could.
It's slightly tricky because different frontline workers all work for different organisations. That's why so it's very difficult for me to give a statement that says everybody will do this. So what a bus company is going to do compared to what the police force is going to do is different. I think though, and obviously the pay settlements, which is a very sensitive subject at the moment, are nationally negotiated. I think there's probably two things I would call out though. We are very determined to move on with the recruitment of extra people. So the support through having more colleagues is very important. So if you look at the police recruitment, that is underway well in the West Midlands. I think the target is 346 more officers this year. If you look at areas like healthcare recruitment, we're working actively with the universities, particularly Wolverhampton, BCU and Coventry, and then the FE colleges to actually get more people opportunities in those areas. And again, Combined Authority Skills Team has that sort of responsibility for gluing all that together with the colleges. And if you look at, certainly if you look at the public transport workers, I hope you'd say that we've done a pretty decent job keeping the service going throughout all of it, and thanks to all frontline workers for that. And obviously we will be looking to continue to invest in all of our transport forms, and of course make sure that even if the patronage is lower, we still maintain all of the services, actually, which is very important. So that question can be taken in all sorts of ways. I hope I've given you some examples there of what we're thinking. I also hope, by the way, that there will be some form of official recognition of this. I hope, and it's perhaps a wee bit too soon because we don't want to declare victory just yet, do we? But it would only be right that there's the appropriate memorials, so maybe even peace gardens, reflection spaces. And I think we will see some of that coming as well. And I've only heard of one definite scheme so far, which is in Solihull, actually, where they've taken a piece of woodland on the south of Shirley, or going to create a piece of woodland as a commemorative woodland area. I think that's a lovely idea, just as a place to go and reflect and say thank you to people who've seen us through all of this.
Hello, my name's Janet. I'm from Solihull, and I'm wanting to know when we can have an international passport vaccine, so that we can go anywhere we want to go.
So I think it won't necessarily be a passport, but something's going to be required. I think you're going to not just to fly, by the way. I think in time, if you want to go to a big public event like a conference, you'll probably have to show that you've recently either been vaccinated or had a negative test. And I think that my own view is that will come and it will be required. And, you know, the underlying point which links so much of this together is in the pandemic, we've genuinely all been in it together. Nobody could be selfish and just say this is just about me. Everyone's been in it. And that will be the same in how we think about safety as we come out the other side as well.